Hello, in this video I'm going to explain how to create this really cool effect. I'm going to use a simple portrait as a starting point here. I've also got another image that I'm going to use to drop in to the sunglasses here just to give me a more interesting reflection. And then I'm going to use an array of different flowing shapes that I've downloaded using the Creative Cloud app. And if you've got Photoshop CC, then you'll have the Creative Cloud app. And if we just back up, you can see within the Assets tab here, we can perform a search. And I've made a search for ornamental objects here. And this has brought up lots of these interesting flowing lines and shapes that I can use in this particular project. In fact, there are a few by this uploader called Michael Cena that I've found quite useful here. And if we find one we like, all we have to do is hit download. We can choose to download to a library. So I've set up a library here called Vector Face. And then once downloaded, we can pick it up within Photoshop to use within our project. Now, if you haven't got Photoshop CC, you won't have the Creative Cloud app, in which case you can find lots of similar flowing vector shapes online for free download if you do a search perhaps for ornamental vectors or something similar to that. So let's get started now in Photoshop. I'm going to open up my cover before image here, and then I'm going to begin by making a cutout because I want to cut out the face from its original background. So I'm going to use the quick selection tool here, and rather than paint over the face, I'm actually going to select the background and then invert it. So I'm just going to paint over that nice plain backdrop there to select it all, and that's pretty good. And then once that's done, I can go to select inverse to select the face instead. And now I want to improve the selection edge, so I can go to the select and mask button here, and then I can perhaps up the radius a touch by a couple of pixels. I can check smart radius. Then I can go to the refine brush here and paint over any areas that still need attention. There's a bit of the neck here that looks a bit rough, so I'll paint over that area and over the lips here, and any other little parts that I think just need refining a little bit. Once that's done, I can choose to output the selection down here. So I'm going to output to a new layer and then hit OK. So now if we bring up our layers panel by going to window layers here, you can see I've got my cutout layer here and my background layer there is hidden. And let's perhaps rename that layer. So we'll call this layer face, and then I'm going to create a new layer below it just to give me a black backdrop. So I'll highlight the bottom layer there, click the create new layer icon, and we'll call this layer black background. And then I go to edit fill. I can choose contents black and hit OK. And now we're ready to start adding in our shapes. So I'm going to highlight the top layer here so that the shapes are added on top of everything. And then I'm going to go to window libraries to bring up my libraries panel, and here you can see within my vector face library that I set up, I've downloaded a selection of these different flowing shapes, and all I have to do is drag them into the document like this, and then I can resize. So I can hold shift and drag the corner point here of that bounding box to make it slightly larger, just like this, and I'll position that one about there, I think, and then I can double click to apply. Now I need to make a copy of my face layer here, so I'm going to hold Alt and drag it here in the layers panel. Just going to drag it on top of the shape layer. So by Alt dragging different layers, we can make quick copies here in the layers panel, and this just speeds things up. Now I'm also going to hide that lower layer for a second. Then I'm going to go to this top layer here, and I want to clip this layer to the shape below it. I could right click the layer and choose create clipping mask, but an easier way is to hold Alt and click the line between the two layers like this. And you can see what this does here. Now the only part of that top layer there that's visible is the part that's directly over the underlying shape layer. And even if we highlight it and move it around using the move tool here, notice actually in the move tool options I've got the show transform controls option checked up here, and also auto select layer checked, and this really helps when building an image like this with lots of different layers. Now with that selected, I can click on the bounding box here, and this will show you the power of clipping masks, because I can actually move this layer around and you can see how the shape of the layer above remains confined to the shape of my flowing line. So we could perhaps just rotate it slightly and fine-tune the positioning, and then double-click to apply. And then we can continue adding more lines in the same way. Now, just to give me a guide for where to place things, I'm just going to reveal that lower cutout face layer and just lower the opacity, so I've kind of got a rough idea of where everything should sit. And then I can go back to my libraries panel here. In fact, let me highlight the top layer again. So we'll go back to the libraries panel here and drag in another shape. So let's perhaps go for this one here. And then again, we can rotate and resize it until we're happy. Now, we're actually quite restricted in the kind of movements we can make with the transform command here. If I right click while transforming, you can see this gives me a few different options to scale, rotate, skew, but I'd quite like to use this warp option here. At the moment it's grayed out, and that's because we're working with a vector shape. But if we get it roughly in place and then right click the layer here and choose to rasterize layer, we've now made it a pixel based layer, which gives us those different warping options. So I can click on the bounding box again, right click, and now you can see I can warp. And using the warp command here, I can just create more of a flowing shape like this. And this means that we can reuse these same vectors over and over again, because we can use the warp to add a bit more variety so that they don't all look the same. Once we're happy with that, we can hit enter to apply. And again, we can make a quick copy of the face layer. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag that faced copy layer there up to the top of the stack here. And then again, hold Alt and click the line between those two layers. And now you can see I've clipped another copy of the face to that vector shape. So this is how we build up the effect with these different shape layers with a copy of the face clipped to each. Now at the moment, it looks a bit too jumbled. It looks like all of our kind of different lines are just merging into one big mess. What we want to do is actually add some depth to the effect, and we can do that by changing the tones on our different shapes. So for example, we can perhaps darken this lower shape layer here. So I'm going to highlight the face layer there that's associated with that lower shape, and then I'm going to click the create adjustment layer icon here, and we're going to go for levels. Let's just bring our properties panel out here and hide everything else. And now I can use the output levels slider here to dull down that layer slightly. So you can see I'm able to darken down that lower shape layer. Now at the moment you can see my levels layer is going to affect everything below it in the stack, so it's also darkening down my faded out face there in the background. I only really want it to affect my two layers there within that clipping group, so I can actually add this levels layer into that group either by alt clicking the line there again, or I can just click this little icon here at the bottom of the properties panel to clip the adjustment. So now you can see that adjustment will only affect that particular shape, and that gives us complete control over how dark or bright it is. So you can see by darkening it down a little bit, it looks now as if this shape here is on top of that other shape. So now these two lines are starting to look independent from one another. Another way we could make them seem even more different is to actually tweak the colors slightly. So continuing with the shape of this flowing line in the background here, I'm going to try and tweak the color here. So I'm going to click the create adjustment layer icon again. This time we'll go for solid color, and we can choose a color. Let's perhaps go for a kind of pinky tone like that, and hit OK. And then I'm going to change the blend mode here from normal to color. And then again, I'm going to clip it to everything else. So again, I can hold Alt and click the line between that layer and the layer below. So now you can see I'm able to colorize my shape. And we can of course use the layer opacity slider here to change the opacity of that color layer. So if I want it weaker or stronger, I can just use that slider there. So I'm going to bring it to about there, I think. And now we can just keep on building up the effect in the same way. So I'm going to highlight the top layer there and try dragging in another shape like this. Let's again just resize it and reposition it wherever we like here, like this. Let's double click to apply, and again right click and rasterize that layer, and then again go back into transform here and perhaps warp it slightly like this. And then I can reuse some of my lower layers here. So I want to copy all three of these layers here. So I'm going to hold Command, that's Command on a Mac, Control on a PC. And if we just highlight one, hold Command or Control and click on those other two layers, we can highlight all three layers there. Then I'm going to hold Alt and drag all three of them up to the top here and position them above that newly added shape. And then again, I can hold Alt and click the line here to clip them so that they only affect that shape there. Then we can go in and tweak the colors. So let's perhaps just double click the thumbnail there and try a different color for this particular shape here. So let's just adjust the color here like this. We'll perhaps go for a green tone like that, then dull it down. And we can also change the level settings there. If we double click that thumbnail, then we can adjust the output here. Let's bring it up a touch like this. So now we're starting to get somewhere. Let's drag in another shape here. So again, I'll highlight the top layer and let's bring in this shape here. I'll drag it in. Again, position it. Let's make it larger once more. And again, I'll reuse those three layers there. So I'm going to hold Command and click on the three of them, hold Alt, drag them above that copy there. Again, clip them to the shape. And again, tweak the colors and the brightness. Let's perhaps lower the opacity of that color. So you can see how we can build up the effect like this. And the great thing about doing it this way is that everything remains editable. So I could perhaps highlight that shape there. If I want to change the size, I can just make it perhaps a bit bigger like this and bring it across a different part of the image. And then let's perhaps go down and tweak the positioning of this layer here. Just like this. Let's bring it in slightly larger perhaps. And I think that green is too strong, so I can highlight that layer and just lower the green down a little bit more. So you can see how we can keep tweaking all of these settings until we're happy with our jumble of lines and shapes. Now, to make the effect feel kind of more fluid, what I'd like is for a few of my lines to break free from the outline of the face. You can see this line here is looking a little bit dodgy. It's kind of cut off at the neck here. I'd like to actually extend that line further on. And to do this, I can grab the Move tool. I can click on that particular line there. And then if we go down through our layers here, you can see this is the shape that I'm after. So I'm going to target the accompanying cutout face layer that's attached to that particular shape. And then I'm going to clone on this layer here to extend that particular section of the line. So I'm going to grab the clone tool from the tools panel over here. And I want to set this to current layer here in the sample options. I can hold Alt and click on an area that I want to sample from and make sure my opacity is at 100%, and then I can just carry on painting like this. So you can see I'm able to continue that line. Again, I can just Alt click and just continue painting until the line is finished. And of course, then we can carry on building up the effect using these different shapes. And I'm going to jump forwards to a point where I've done just that. So here you can see I've just continued using that exact same technique to add different shapes, and I've clipped a face layer to each, and then use levels and solid color layers here to add some variation to the colors and tones. And I've just continued adding more and more shapes, and you can see on some how I've cloned in that extra detail to extend these flowing lines. And I've also actually had to extend my canvas a little bit to give me a bit of extra space to work with. Now we can add some extra depth to the effect by using simple drop shadows. If we perhaps just pick one of the different lines here, let's go for this one. Then we can double click the layer there and choose to add a drop shadow by checking this option down at the bottom here. If we zoom in a little closer to that particular part of the image, if we toggle it on or off, you can see this is the shadow here that we're creating. If you see this kind of circular shape here, if I toggle it off and on, you can see how we're able to create a soft shadow underneath that shape, and it affects all of the layers below. So you can see how we can build extra depth in. I can actually click and drag to move that shadow around like this. So I can change the depth of it by moving it around. I'll bring it to about there, I think. If we like, we can also up the opacity. We could go for a really deep shadow or keep it kind of fairly low. So we'll bring it down to about there, I think. And I'm really happy with how that's looking. So then we need to add shadows to all of our other layers. So I'll hit OK to apply that. But rather than go through that whole process again, instead we can use the old drag and drop technique within our layers panel here. So I can Alt drag the drop shadow here to another layer. So I can hold Alt and drag the effect here from one shape layer to the next, and that will quickly copy it over just like that. Now I haven't really got much room here in my layers panel, so I'm actually going to go to my panel options here and choose to have the thumbnail size set to none, and that just gives me more space to see all of my different layers here within the stack. And then I can hold Alt and drag the drop shadow between these different shape layers here to quickly copy it over. This will hopefully speed things up. So now all of my different shape layers have that same drop shadow layer style applied to them. And in fact, I can just bring up my history panel here and I'll show you a before and after of all of the different layer style drop shadow effects. So this was before adding any of them, and this is with them all applied. So you can see the difference that makes to the actual depth of the effect. That's the before and that's the after. Next, we're going to finish things off. We're going to add in that reflection to the sunglasses here. So I'm going to just set my panel options here back to the thumbnail view so I can see what's on my individual layers here. And then I'm just going to drag one of my face layers to the top of the stack. So again, I can Alt drag it to make a copy. And then I'm going to use the quick selection tool here. I'm going to uncheck sample all layers and then paint to select the sunglasses like this. And once I'm happy with the selection, I can click the add layer mask icon to convert that selection to a layer mask and hide everything else on that layer. Now I also want to select the inside area, the glass area on the sunglasses, and it's easiest to do this using the pen tool. So let's just hide my libraries panel now. I can grab the pen tool from the tools panel over here, and then let's zoom in closer to those sunglasses. Then I can click and drag to add these anchor points around the edges of the glasses like this, just to make a really quick selection of this area like this. And I'm obviously being quite rough about this, but you can be a bit more precise if needs be. And then we can bring it back around to our starting point here. We can also continue over the other glasses like this. And if we need to tweak a point, we can click on it with Command or Control and then hold Command or Control and drag it around to move it. We can move these handles as well if we like. And once we're happy with the path there, we can bring up the path panel by going to Window, Paths, and then I can hold Command or Control and click on the work path thumbnail there to load it as a selection. Then I'm going to bring in that other image of the cityscape here. And I can use the move tool to drag it over across to my main image and drop it in. And then I'm going to click the mask icon here so that the city scene is masked to the shape of my sunglasses, and we can zoom out a little bit to see how that's looking. Now, if we want to tweak the position of that image there, we can click this little icon here to unlink the image from the layer mask, and then we can highlight the image thumbnail there, click on the bounding box using the move tool here, and then change the position. So you can see we're able to change the position of the image part of the layer without affecting the layer mask. So I'm going to bring it to about there, and in fact I can also right click and choose warp, and we can use the warp here to just add a bit of curvature, which is the kind of curvature we'd see with a reflection in curved glasses like this. Hit enter to apply, and then again just tweak the positioning until we're happy. We could also perhaps add a touch of blur to this layer here. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you can see we'll set the radius fairly low, about 3.9 is working fine, perhaps even lower. That just adds a touch of blur just to make it look a little bit more realistic as a reflection. Now we also want to darken it down a little bit, so again we'll use levels for this. So I'll click the create adjustment layer icon here, go for levels, and again we'll clip the adjustment so that it only affects that reflection layer below, and then I'm going to just increase the output levels white point here, drag that inwards. We can also add a slight color shift here, so I'm going to set the channel here to red, and then if we drag this black point in, which you can see, we can kind of introduce a pinky shift to the shadows like that. So I'll bring it to about there, I think. And I'd also like to create a few kind of highlights and shadows across the surface of the glass. So I'm going to click the create new layer icon here, and again alt click to clip it to my reflection layer there. In fact, let's just rename this layer reflection. And let's close that panel down now. So we'll grab the brush tool from the tools panel over here, and we want to make sure we're working with a low opacity brush. Somewhere around about 10% is fine. We can right click and make sure that our brush hardness is right down at 0, and then making sure that we have that layer there highlighted, we can paint with either white or black to add highlights and shadows. So we can hit D to reset our colors here to black and white, and then I can gradually start painting to darken down parts of the glasses. I can hit X to flip my foreground color to white, and then paint add highlights like this. So again, let's just paint a few more blacks around here, and a few highlights at the top. So you can see how this gives depth to the glasses, and we'll do the same with the other lens over here. And if I toggle that layer off and on, you can see the difference that makes to the depth of the glasses. And I'm happy with that. Now I think that's it, my effect nearly finished. Let's just zoom out here. We could perhaps finish off with a few tonal tweaks, and let's perhaps add another adjustment layer here at the top of our layer stack, and we'll go for a color lookup adjustment, and then we can perhaps just choose one of these presets here. Let's go for a crisp winter look. I quite like the effect that's given me. I can, of course, if I want, lower the layer opacity of that color lookup layer there to tone down the effect. I'll bring it down to about there, I think. Let's perhaps add a vibrance adjustment as well here, just to boost those colors. Again, we go back to the properties panel and increase the vibrance like this, just to give me nice, strong, punchy colors like this. And then let's perhaps add a curves adjustment and make an S-shaped curve like this, just to give me a little bit more punch to the effect. And I'm happy with that. So there we have it. That's how to create a really cool vector face effect like this.